Welcome to Reaction TV. I'm Maggie Pagano, Executive Editor, and with me this evening, I'm delighted to say, is Simon French, Chief Economist at Panmure Gordon. And we are talking about the hot topic at the moment, and that is the latest huge rise in gas prices and crisis talks between the government and suppliers and so forth. Now, I came across an article, Simon, that you wrote in April 2017. Great headline, by the way, great line. Caps, control and lock belong on a keyboard and not in the economy. And you predicted that putting an energy cap on prices would be potentially disaster. Can you explain your thinking and then tell us what you think is really happening at the moment?
Absolutely, and good evening, Maggie. And first of all, thank you for having me on this section. It's a delight to talk to you.
You too.
The article that I did 4 years ago, I hope, acknowledged that there has become perhaps a sense within government that it can predict with certainty economic variables going forward, be it inflation, be it the gas price, and by putting in caps or locks or constraints, automatic ways in which you deliver either controls on prices or uplifts in prices or indeed awards or benefits, then you risk, and this is the real heart of it, you risk those really powerful mechanisms of prices that you have in a capitalist system that decide how households make consumption decisions and how businesses invest. You risk neutering those. And those are such powerful allocative signals, important for our efficiency, important for our productivity, that I thought it was misguided. And I think 4 years on, that column has aged pretty well.
I think so. Not many can say that. So we have crisis talks at the moment. The business minister, Kwasi Kwarteng, has said that, well, he's indicated that he might well bail out a lot of the suppliers who came into the market after when those energy caps came in. Now, do we think it is right that the taxpayers should be bailing them out? Because in a sense, you could argue that their business model, they weren't obviously hedging enough, they can't afford it, they don't have the capital to do so. Actually, it proves your point, doesn't it, that the market was not an efficient allocator. So what do you think would be the correct direction now?
Well, to steal someone else's quote, I wouldn't have started from here. And that is, unfortunately, the position that Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng finds himself in. And I actually have a lot of time for Mr. Kwarteng, but unfortunately, the misguided policies leads to a situation where it is inconceivable that we can have service withdrawn of such a core utility as energy, particularly over the winter months. Indeed, in any month. But I think it's crucial here that what comes out of this period, because it's inevitable that the Exchequer will be on the hook in terms of supporting energy companies, that we have a real understanding of what an optimal market in an area that is so fundamental to people's lives, it's a core utility function, what that looks like. It's absolutely the correct thing to try and encourage competition between suppliers. It's absolutely the right thing to try and avoid supernormal profits that is so easy in an oligopoly or a monopoly model. But unfortunately, if it is heads you win, tails we lose, that is unfortunately not a good way to try and introduce market forces into what is a natural oligopoly or monopoly model.
So if we go back in time, the reason that this cap came about was because of widespread fears and belief that the big six, as we used to call them, Centrica, RWE and the others, were in fact profiteering, despite actually, if you looked at their accounts, the margins were very thin. So are we saying that actually they weren't profiteering and that there was a misconception about how the market worked? And if that is the case, should we allow, if you like, those big six to re-emerge?
I'll give you a straight answer to a straight question. Yes, I think it was a misdiagnosis. I think that was the wrong way of looking at the market. The market failure here in economic terms was that consumers were failing to shop around and taking advantage of the fact that there were available prices, better prices than the standard variable tariff on most of these energy companies. And the government, perhaps to its credit, some years ago wanted to encourage consumers to be more savvy, to shop around. But a startling stat that I came across from Ofgem, the regulator, is that 60% of UK households are still on their standard variable tariff. They've never changed their energy provider. And therefore, as a result, consumers have made the decision to vote with their feet, or indeed not vote, not use their feet to vote and move their custom elsewhere. And the problem, of course, with an energy price cap is, rather than trying to encourage that through the price mechanism, because of course, if you reach a pressure point, you want consumers to respond to that price signal and shop around, you're actually doing quite the opposite of what you want to do, which is to energize and activate the consumer to stop the big six or whatever suppliers from creating monopoly profits. You're going in exactly the opposite direction if you want to have consumers making savvy financial decisions.
How could you improve that? Because I have to say, when I've looked myself, when we've looked as a household at sort of swapping around and different tariffs, I mean, it's just so complicated that I'm afraid I'm clearly not one of your savvy customers. It's one of those things that goes the back of the pile, doesn't it? And you think, well, maybe an extra X or Y, but to a lot of people that does matter. So is there anything they could do to improve that?
Well, there's the risk of being the answer always being technology. There are quite a lot of intermediaries coming into the marketplace who take control of your energy bills. You share your data with them. You instruct them. You enter an intermediary contract for that intermediary function to shop around on your behalf. So if you don't want to do it, you can employ an intermediary in order to ensure that every 12 months, every 18 months, every 2 years, at what point your renewal is, that they come in and use their market intelligence to navigate what absolutely is a bit of a minefield in terms of understanding the myriad of tariffs out there. So given that both commercial enterprises, intermediaries can come in and do that, and in so doing, free up time for other people, for people who don't want to do it, to pursue other interests that in economic terms they gain more utility from. That for me is a healthy market-based model. Yeah,
okay. Now, Mr. Kwarteng has said or promised that he wouldn't actually lift the energy cap, and yet at the same time they've said, or rather they would keep an energy cap, and yet at the same time they said it will probably go up to 1,277 this autumn, and then possibly 1,500 next spring. Now, isn't that yet another sort of artificial barrier? It seems rather bizarre. How can they anticipate what it's going to be next spring anyway? Doesn't it, in a sense, make it even more of a nonsense of the idea of having this cap?
It does, and particularly that would look a very odd commitment if the wholesale gas price, if the wind starts blowing in the United Kingdom, some of the supply tanker shortages, supply routes start to provide more and the wholesale price comes down. Some of the assessment I did when the energy price cap came out, the latest one on the 6th of August this year, is Ofgem revealed that already the 42% increase year on year in wholesale gas added about £155 to the average dual fuel tariff versus last year. But if you took the spot price over the last 7 days and fed that into Ofgem's formula, £155 would now be north of £900 additional on a typical household's utility bill. That is a 6x increase over the course of just more than 6 weeks. So for Mr. Kwarteng to have any idea on what it looks like in 6 weeks, 6 months' time, I think is overstretching both his forecasting ability and indeed the forecasting ability of anybody who operates in what is a globalized energy market.
Absolutely. And on that point, whilst we're obviously all here concentrating on the UK market, of course, these wholesale prices have been going up right across Europe and indeed even in the US. I think over the last year, 280% across EU countries. I certainly know the Spanish, the Italians have been whacking up their bills as well. But is our situation worse here? Has it been worsened by the cap?
I wouldn't say it was worsened by the cap insofar as from a consumer's perspective. And my criticism of this is not the sort of consumer utility, again, to use the jargon that the British consumers have garnered from all of this, but it is the second order effects that really concerns me in terms of the stability and the efficiency of the marketplace. What higher prices, those numbers you mentioned from both the US and Europe, and indeed from the UK, be it generated as a result of regulation in the form of green taxes associated to try and incentivize households to shift, is by not passing those impacts on in full by introducing a price cap, you have discouraged households to go and A, use less electricity, B, update their technology, their energy usage to more efficient sources, and of course microgeneration solutions, solar panels, air source heat pumps. While many people will rightly say the economics of those don't stack up, of course with the higher wholesale price, the economics of that investment do start to stack up, and therefore the very energy transition that I suspect Boris Johnson in New York will talk about and talk about again at COP26 is actually paradoxically uncomfortable for a lot of people, but will be encouraged, reinforced, incentivized by higher prices, because that is the market sending healthy signals on what households and businesses need to do.
So Simon, if you had one piece of advice for the business minister and the industry, what reforms would you like to see introduced? What can they do to get out of this rather tricky situation?
Well, near term, unfortunately, there is a political imperative, a social imperative for continuity of supply, and not to introduce a shock where people who had previous capped utility bills with a provider that potentially goes bust and they move to another supplier don't have a particular uplift. Unfortunately, general taxation, the Exchequer Treasury are going to have to dip into their pockets in order to ensure both that continuity of service and less of a shock to household incomes. But then going forward, and as with all good public policy, I'm afraid the boring answer is this will take many, many years in order to instigate, is reintroduce the price signals that the free market entails. Now, if you are worried about operators in that market generating supernormal profits, then have a competition and markets authority with the teeth that the previous head of the CMA, Andrew Tyree, wanted to introduce, but ultimately had been neutered at many turns. I think there is a big role here if you want to regulate what is traditionally a utility style model, to do it through that mechanism rather than blunt price mechanisms which have those really damaging second order effects.
Absolutely. Final question, Simon, and I'll leave you. Have we been too hasty in the UK to try and cut carbon emissions 80% or now 100% by 2050 and to switch over to renewables? Because I was looking at the BM reports live data feed on the national grid today, and 47% of all electricity supplies came from gas. I think it was 16% from biomass and wind and about 10 from solar. So, I mean, we know that the wind has been exceptionally low, but, our reliance on foreign imports, our cutting of coal, which, obviously was the right thing to do over time. But have we been too eager to do this without looking at overall supplies going forward?
This is to some extent a subjective judgment, but I would say no, we haven't been too eager. But I will buttress it by something which is a bit more objective, which is to say to be intellectually coherent with our conversation of the last 10 minutes. I think it's really important that governments, regulators send out consistent signals to the market in order for them to plan. It doesn't matter whether it's on the capacity side or in terms of the households for upgrading their technology. And therefore, I'm comfortable personally with a target that is 29 years away, that gives a lead-in time for capital in the private sector, capital in the household sector, to respond and make those transitions over that timescale. I don't see that as a particularly over-ambitious or putting it as at a disadvantage, while the pain near-term for households may be higher bills. Longer term, and there are plenty of very reputable reports here, if the UK develops, becomes a, dare I say it, a global leader, but certainly a supplier of relevance in the green economy, that generates jobs, that generates incomes that support both productivity and ultimately the ability to pay those energy bills going forward. It's a circular economy here. And I personally think that those kind of market signals are quite important and quite valuable, not a time that I'm personally uncomfortable with.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, Simon, thank you so much for your insight. Let's hope that Mr. Kwarteng is listening to you.